They called us in to confirm a miracle. A human colony under Europa's ice. Through the frost glass, faces pressed close, pale and smooth, eyes milk-white like pearls. They smiled without showing teeth. When they spoke, it wasn't words at first, but clicks and soft hums, shaped by water and pressure instead of air. Our names slid out of those sounds, each one perfect. "Welcome back," they said, though none of us had been there before. The airlock opened, the corridor breathed cold. They moved with a calm, floating grace, hands slightly webbed, skin clear as glass at the wrists, where blue veins sang. "We did not leave Earth," their leader murmured. "Earth left us." Floors trembled with a slow rhythm, and our chest monitors began to match it, one beat, then another, until our hearts felt pulled by the ocean below. Lights dimmed to green. In the shadows we saw children watching, pupils wide, heads tilted like they were listening to something far away. "Come," they urged, pointing down a shaft where ice thinned and darkness rang like a bell. "You will learn to hear the undersong," they promised, smiling without teeth. "It is gentle. It will change your bones." But I'm getting ahead of myself. 3 weeks ago, I was debugging navigation algorithms at the Johnson Space Center in Houston, complaining about the vending machine coffee and wondering if my ex-wife was fucking her yoga instructor yet. Dr. Tobias Kruger found me there, hunched over code at 2 a.m., my reflection ghostly in the monitor's blue glow. "Pack light," he said, dropping a classified folder on my desk. "We leave for Kourou in 6 hours." The folder contained impossible things. Thermal signatures indicating a subsurface habitat beneath Europa's ice, radio transmissions in what appeared to be corrupted English, and most disturbing, biometric readings that matched human baselines. Not alien, human. "Bullshit," I told him. But my hands were already shaking as I flipped through the pages. Satellite imagery showed geometric patterns carved into the ice, too precise for nature, too organic for machines. "The Galileo probe detected these anomalies 18 months ago," Kruger said. "We've been monitoring radio chatter since then. They know our names, Jake. They know we're coming." I wanted to laugh, to tell him he'd been reading too much science fiction. Instead, I found myself staring at a spectrographic analysis that showed oxygen production rates impossible for any known life form. The numbers didn't lie, even when everything else screamed that they should. 6 hours later, I was strapped into a transport heading for French Guiana, watching Earth shrink through a porthole while my stomach churned with equal parts excitement and dread. The other team members, Dimitri from the Moscow Institute, Bruno from ESA, Oscar from the Australian Space Agency, looked as shaken as I felt. "We thought we were going to make first contact with humanity's lost colony. We had no idea we were about to discover what humanity could become when it forgot it was supposed to stay human." The Meridian shuddered as we dropped out of hyperspace, Jupiter's gravitational well grabbing us like a fist. Through the observation deck, Europa hung before us, a marble of ice and shadow, striped with dark fractures that looked disturbingly organic from this distance. "Jesus Christ," Dimitri whispered, his Russian accent thick with awe. "Look at the thermal readings." Our ship's sensors painted Europa's surface in false-color infrared, revealing heat signatures that pulsed in regular intervals across the southern hemisphere. Not the chaotic thermals you'd expect from geological activity, but something measured, deliberate. Bruno adjusted his thick-rimmed glasses, fingers dancing across the navigation console. "The patterns are consistent with the satellite data, but the intensity..." He paused, frowning at his displays. "It's increased by 30% since we left Earth orbit." I pulled up the communications array, scanning for the transmissions that had brought us here. Static filled my headphones, broken by occasional bursts of what sounded almost like whale songs. Deep, resonant calls that made my spine tingle. "There," Oscar said, pointing at the comm station. His Australian drawl couldn't hide the tension in his voice. "Same frequency as the recordings." The sound was clearer now, no longer filtered through Earth's atmospheric interference. Beneath the whale-like calls, I could make out something else. rhythmic clicking that reminded me of sonar, but too complex, too purposeful, almost like Morse code, if Morse code could express emotions. "Can you isolate the signal?" Kruger asked from behind me. The mission commander had barely slept during our 3-week journey, poring over classified files and muttering to himself in German. I worked the controls, filtering out cosmic background radiation and Jupiter's electromagnetic interference. The signal strengthened, and suddenly words emerged from the static, distorted, but unmistakably English. "Waiting. So long. The ice grows thin. Brothers from above." We exchanged glances. The voice was human, but wrong somehow. The vowels stretched too long, consonants softened by something that wasn't quite an accent. "Range to the surface anomaly?" Kruger asked. 43 kilometers, Bruno replied. "Descent trajectory locked. We'll be at the landing coordinates in 6 hours. The ship's AI, a sophisticated navigation system called ATLAS, chimed in with its neutral synthetic voice. "Warning, subsurface sonar readings indicate structural impossibilities. Recommend extended orbital survey before descent." Kruger dismissed the warning with a wave. "Override safety protocols. We didn't come this far to orbit like tourists." I wasn't so sure. The thermal signatures were shifting even as we watched, forming new patterns that resembled neural networks or root systems. Something about the way they moved made my skin crawl. Too organic for geology, too vast for any life form I could imagine. "Jake, you're looking pale," Oscar observed, offering me a protein bar from his personal stash. Despite everything, I found myself grateful for his easy humor. Of all the team members, he seemed least affected by the strangeness surrounding our mission. "Just processing," I said, taking the bar but not eating it. My appetite had vanished somewhere around Saturn. The communications array crackled again, and this time the voice was clearer. "Welcome home, travelers. The ocean remembers your names. Jacob, Dmitri, Bruno, Oscar, Tobias. Come to us. Come down where the water is warm and the songs never end." We'd never transmitted our names, never announced our approach. Our ship's beacon identified us only as ESA Mission 2157, and our personal communication systems were locked down. "How do they know?" Dimitri's voice was barely a whisper. Kruger moved to the tactical station, his fingers hovering over the weapon systems. Not that plasma charges would do much good against whatever was down there. "Unknown. Continue descent." The ship trembled as we entered Europa's thin atmosphere. Ice particles struck the hull with sounds like fingernails on glass. Through the viewports, the surface rushed toward us, an endless expanse of white broken by those dark fractures that seemed to pulse with their own light. "Landing site visual," Bruno announced, "and fuck me." I looked over his shoulder at the main display. Where our sensors had detected the thermal anomaly, the ice had been carved away to reveal a perfect circle of dark water. Structures rose from beneath the surface, not quite buildings, not quite coral formations, but something in between. They glowed with bioluminescent patterns that shifted and flowed like living text. "It's beautiful," Oscar breathed. "It's wrong," I countered, but even as I said it, I felt drawn to those lights. They seemed to pulse in rhythm with my heartbeat, calling me down into the depths. The voice came again, closer now, as if the speakers were standing right beside us. "Land safely, brothers. The children are eager to meet you. They have been practicing your language, shaping their mouths for surface words. Soon you will learn ours." Atlas spoke up one final time. "Structural analysis complete. Recommendation: immediate return to Earth orbit. Subsurface readings indicate impossible architecture. This facility should not exist." Kruger's hand slammed down on the override switch. "Landing sequence initiated. Prep the environment suits." As we descended toward that circle of dark water, I caught my reflection in the viewport glass. For just a moment, my eyes looked different, paler, wider, as if they were adapting to different light. I blinked and they were normal again, but the feeling lingered. The meridian settled onto Europa's surface with a mechanical groan that echoed across the ice fields. Through my helmet's visor, the landscape stretched endlessly, pristine white broken by those dark fractures that seemed to breathe in the low gravity. Jupiter loomed overhead, a striped giant casting amber light across the frozen world. Environmental suits check green across the board, Bruno reported, his voice crackling through the comm system. Atmospheric pressure negligible, radiation levels within acceptable parameters. I tested my suit's mobility joints, feeling the reassuring hum of the heating elements. The temperature outside hovered at -160 Celsius, cold enough to freeze oxygen solid. Yet the thermal readings from the subsurface habitat registered a balmy 15 degrees. "Remember, we're here to observe and document," Kruger said, sealing his helmet. "No direct interaction without my authorization." Oscar snorted. "Bit late for that, isn't it? They've been talking to us for weeks." The airlock cycled and we stepped onto Europa's surface. The gravity felt strange, about 13% of Earth normal, making each step feel like a lazy bounce. Our boots crunched through a thin layer of frost, leaving deep impressions in the older ice beneath. The habitat entrance lay 50 meters ahead, a perfect circle of dark water surrounded by carved ice formations that spiraled upward like frozen tornadoes. Steam rose from the opening, creating rainbow halos in Jupiter's light. "Sonar shows the water descends at least 200 meters, Dmitri said, checking his handheld scanner. "But there's something wrong with the readings. The echoes are musical." He was right. Even through our suit radios we could hear it, a deep harmonic resonance rising from the depths. Not quite singing, not quite machinery, but something that made the metal components in our equipment vibrate sympathetically. "Movement," Oscar called out, pointing toward the water's edge. Shapes rose from the depths, breaking the surface with barely a ripple. At first glance, they looked human. 2 arms, 2 legs, a head where it should be. But the proportions were wrong. Too tall, too graceful, limbs slightly elongated as if stretched by years of swimming. Their skin held a pale luminescence, and when they breathed, gills fluttered along their elongated necks. The leader, the one who had spoken to us on the ship, stepped onto the ice. Water didn't cling to his body but beaded and rolled away, leaving him perfectly dry. His eyes were the color of deep ocean, and when he smiled, I glimpsed rows of small, sharp teeth designed for a diet I didn't want to contemplate. "Welcome," he said, and his voice carried clearly across the vacuum. Somehow, impossibly, sound was traveling without atmosphere. "I am Nerion. We have been expecting you since the ice first sang your names." Kruger stepped forward, his hand resting on his sidearm. "I'm Commander Tobias Kruger, European Space Agency. We're here to establish peaceful contact with your community." Nerion tilted his head, water droplets falling from hair that looked more like kelp than keratin. "Community? Yes, that is your word. We prefer school. Like the fish who swim together, think together, dream together." Behind him, more figures emerged from the water, men and women, though the distinction seemed less important here, all sharing that same pale luminescence, those same shark-like teeth. Some appeared to be children, their features softer but their movements equally fluid. "How long have you been here?" Bruno asked, raising his camera to record the encounter. "Time moves differently in the depths," Nerion replied. "We arrived 30 of your years ago. 50. The ice remembers better than we do. We came seeking refuge from the wars above. Your wars." "What wars?" I found myself asking. 30 years ago, there were no space wars. No colonies to flee from. Nerion's smile widened, revealing more of those needle-sharp teeth. "Not yet, Brother Jacob. But the ice showed us what would come. The burning skies, the poisoned seas, the great forgetting. So we came here, where the water is clean and the songs never lie." Dmitri lowered his scanner, frowning at the readings. "These people, they're generating heat signatures beyond human norms. Body temperature averaging 42 degrees Celsius, but their tissue isn't cooking. It's impossible." "Impossible," Nerion repeated, savoring the word. Yes, that is what the surface dwellers say about many things. Come, let us show you what lies beneath the impossible. He gestured toward the water, and I noticed his hands, fingers slightly webbed, nails replaced by something harder, more claw-like, functional adaptations for an aquatic life. The water is breathable, he continued. Your lungs will remember how to extract oxygen from liquid. All mammals can, given proper encouragement. Like hell, Oscar muttered, but I could see the fascination in his posture. We all could feel it. The pull of that warm water, the promise of secrets hidden in the depths. We have prepared chambers filled with air for your comfort, Nerion said. But first, you must see our children. They have been so eager to meet the surface dwellers, to share their games and songs. From the water emerged smaller figures, their features more human than their elders, but with the same unnatural grace. One approached me directly, his eyes wide with curiosity. Are you the storyteller? The child asked, and his voice was pure music, each word a perfectly tuned note. Nerion says you carry tales of the dry places, of the burning star and the green world. I knelt to his level, struck by how normal he looked until you noticed the details. The translucent skin that showed veins like rivers, the gills that fluttered when he was excited, the way his pupils dilated to perfect black circles in Jupiter's light. What's your name? I asked. Names are surface concepts, he replied. We know each other by our songs. But if I must choose surface words, call me Keel. It means safe harbor in the old tongue. What old tongue? The one you forgot when you learned to walk upright. Behind me, Kruger was growing agitated. We need to establish protocols for extended contact, medical examinations, cultural exchanges, technical assessments. Commander, Bruno interrupted, pointing at his equipment readouts. Our communication array just went dead. Full system failure. I checked my own gear. The long-range transmitters had indeed failed, but the cause wasn't immediately obvious. No damage, no power fluctuations. They had simply stopped working. The ice does not enjoy harsh electromagnetic radiation, Nerion explained calmly. It prefers natural frequencies, organic communications. Do not worry. You will learn to speak as we do. And if we choose not to? Kruger demanded. Nerion's expression didn't change, but something in his posture shifted. The other colonists moved slightly closer, their movements synchronized like a school of fish responding to a predator. Choice is a luxury of the surface, he said. Here, we simply become what the water requires us to become. The child Keel tugged at my suit's arm. Come see our city, he pleaded. Come see how beautiful we've made the depths. Your heart will sing with joy when you see what we've built in the crushing dark. I looked into those wide, innocent eyes and saw something. In the depths of his pupils, tiny lights moved in patterns, bioluminescent communications flickering like Morse code. He wasn't just looking at me. He was reading me, cataloguing me, measuring me for something I couldn't begin to understand. Jake, Oscar said quietly, your suit's biosensors are going crazy. Heart rate spiking, adrenaline off the charts. What's wrong? But I couldn't answer. Because in that moment, staring into Keel's alien eyes, I realized we weren't looking at humanity's lost colony. We were looking at humanity's future. We should return to the ship, Kruger said, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. Re-establish communications, report our findings to Earth Control. But even as he spoke, we could see the meridian in the distance, its hull coated with a thin layer of ice that hadn't been there an hour ago. Frost patterns spread across its surface in geometric spirals, beautiful and wrong. The ship's environmental systems are compromised, Bruno reported, checking his remote diagnostics tablet. Hull temperature dropping rapidly, internal atmosphere showing contamination with unknown organic compounds. Nerion smiled, his needle teeth catching Jupiter's amber light. The ice embraces all things eventually. Your vessel will be preserved, transformed into something more suitable for this world. Do not mourn its crude machinery. We will show you better ways to travel. Keel tugged at my suit again, his child's voice carrying disturbing harmonics. Please, storyteller. The deep chambers are warm. The elders wish to show you our history, carved in living coral and sung in living voices. Against every instinct screaming in my head, I found myself nodding. The alternative was freezing to death on Europa's surface, and the warm glow rising from the depths promised comfort, safety, answers to questions I'd carried my whole life. 30 minutes, Kruger conceded. Environmental suits stay sealed. Nobody removes their helmets for any reason. We followed the colonists to the water's edge, where they had constructed what looked like an elevator, a translucent tube that descended into the depths, filled with the same warm, glowing liquid that comprised their habitat. Nerion gestured for us to enter. The descent chamber maintains surface pressure, he assured us. Your lungs will not be required to adapt, yet. The tube sealed around us with a sound like a sigh, and we began to sink. Through the transparent walls, I watched Europa's subsurface ocean unfold in impossible beauty. Structures grew from the sea floor like coral reefs, but geometric and purposeful. Lights moved between them, not artificial illumination, but living things that pulsed with bioluminescent communication. How deep? Dmitri asked, watching his depth gauge spin toward numbers that shouldn't exist beneath Europa's thin crust. Deep enough to touch the moon's molten heart, Nerion replied. The thermal vents provide warmth, minerals, energy. We have learned to reshape them, to make them sing our songs and dream our dreams. At 50 meters, we passed through a membrane that rippled like water but held its shape. The pressure inside the tube equalized with a pop that made my ears ring. At 100 meters, fish swam past, or things that looked like fish until you noticed they had tiny human faces, their expressions serene and vacant. Jesus Christ, Oscar whispered, are those... The first to adapt completely, Nerion said with pride. Their minds found the transition too difficult, so they chose simplicity. They are happy now, free from the burden of complex thought. Bruno stopped filming. You're talking about lobotomized humans. We prefer the term liberated, Nerion corrected. Not everyone is strong enough to maintain individual consciousness while embracing collective harmony. The weak become peaceful. The strong become more. At 200 meters, we reached the colony proper. The elevator opened onto a chamber that defied physics, air-filled spaces existing underwater, supported by some biological membrane that filtered oxygen from the liquid surrounding us. The architecture was organic, grown rather than built, with surfaces that pulsed gently like living tissue. Remove your helmets, Nerion suggested. The air here is pure, rich with minerals that will strengthen your lungs. Absolutely not, Kruger snapped. But Keel was already pulling at my helmet seals, his small fingers surprisingly strong. Please, storyteller. You cannot hear the undersong through glass and metal. You cannot taste the water words or feel the pressure poems. My helmet's heads-up display flickered, then died. The environmental systems were failing one by one, and I could smell something sweet and organic seeping through the air recyclers. Without meaning to, I found my hands moving to the helmet releases. Jake, don't, Oscar warned, but his own voice sounded distant, dreamy. Something's wrong with the air mix. We're getting dosed with some kind of psychoactive compound. Too late. My helmet came off with a soft hiss, and I breathed Europa's transformed atmosphere. It tasted like copper and salt and something indefinably alive. The sweetness intensified, and suddenly, the chamber's organic walls were beautiful instead of horrifying. Their pulsing rhythm synchronized with my heartbeat. Keel clapped his hands with delight. Now you can hear, he exclaimed. Listen to the colony's song. And I could hear it. A vast harmonic resonance rising from the depths, carried by the water and the living architecture. It was the sound of 10,000 voices singing in perfect unison, but the words were in a language that predated human speech. My bones vibrated with the rhythm, and I found myself swaying in time with the music. The history chambers are this way, Nerion said, leading us through corridors that breathed and pulsed like arteries. We will show you how the transformation began, how the first colonists learned to love the water more than the air. Bruno had removed his helmet too, his camera dangling forgotten at his side. "Magnificent," he whispered, running his hands along the living walls. "It's like being inside a massive organism." Dimitri was more resistant, keeping his helmet sealed, but I could see the strain in his posture. His suit systems were failing too, and he wouldn't be able to hold out much longer. Only Kruger remained fully protected, his military-grade environmental suit holding against whatever was in the air. "We need to leave," he said. "Now, before it's too late." But it was already too late for me. The colony's song had gotten into my head, into my blood, and I could feel my body beginning to change. My skin tingled where the air touched it, and when I looked at my hands, the veins stood out more prominently, carrying fluids that glowed faintly blue. We reached the history chamber, a vast spherical room with walls covered in living coral that moved and shifted, displaying scenes from the colony's past. I watched the first colonists arrive, normal humans fleeing some catastrophe on Earth. They had built crude habitats, struggled against the cold and the pressure. Then something changed. The coral showed them discovering the thermal vents, the native microorganisms that existed in Europa's depths. They had started as parasites, invading human tissue, but the colonists learned to welcome them, to integrate them, to become something new. The symbiosis was beautiful, Nerion explained. Painful at first, yes. 3/4 of the original colonists died during the initial bonding, but those who survived, they became the first of us. The first to breathe water and sing the undersong. "You're talking about parasitic infection," Kruger said, his voice muffled by his helmet. "Biological contamination that killed most of your people and mutated the rest." "We prefer the term evolution," Keel said, his child's voice carrying adult concepts. "Your species has reached a dead end on the surface. War, pollution, hatred, isolation. We offer transcendence." Bruno collapsed then, his body convulsing as something moved beneath his skin. The organic compounds in the air had concentrated in his system, and I watched in fascination rather than horror as his fingers began to web, his breathing becoming labored as primitive gills opened along his neck. "Bruno!" Dimitri rushed to help him, but his own suit was failing. Emergency seals hissed as contaminated air leaked in. "It's beautiful," Bruno gasped, his voice changing, becoming musical. "I can hear the ocean singing to me. I can feel the water calling me home." Kruger drew his sidearm, a plasma charge pistol designed for close quarters combat. "Stay back," he warned Nerion. "Whatever you've done to them, reverse it." Nerion spread his arms, showing empty, webbed palms. "There is no reversal, surface dweller. There is only completion. Your friends have begun the first stage of adaptation. In a few hours, they will be able to breathe water as easily as air. In a few days, they will never want to return to the burning emptiness above." "Like hell," Kruger snarled and fired. The plasma bolt struck Nerion's center mass, a direct hit that should have vaporized his torso. Instead, the energy dispersed harmlessly across his skin, absorbed and redistributed by the same biological adaptations that let him survive in Europa's crushing depths. "Weapons designed for surface warfare are useless here," Nerion said sadly. "Your people always choose violence first. It is why you will never survive among the stars without our help." Bruno was changing faster now, his skin taking on that pale luminescence, his eyes dilating to perfect black circles. When he spoke, his words carried harmonic undertones that made my teeth vibrate. "Jake," he said, his voice like whale song, "don't fight it. The transformation is ecstasy. I can feel the colony's thoughts, their memories, their love. We'll never be alone again." And that's when I realized the horrible truth. This wasn't just biological contamination. It was psychological integration. The colonists hadn't just adapted to Europa's environment. They had become a collective organism, sharing thoughts and memories and dreams. My independent human consciousness was dissolving, merging with something vast and ancient and utterly inhuman, and part of me welcomed it. Kruger's plasma charges were useless, but his training wasn't. He grabbed Dimitri's arm and hauled him toward what looked like an exit, a sphincter-like opening that dilated as they approached. "Jake! Oscar! We're leaving now." but I couldn't move. The colony's collective consciousness was flowing through me like warm honey, showing me memories that weren't my own. I saw the first colonists' arrival through dozens of perspectives simultaneously, felt their terror and wonder and desperate hope as one overwhelming emotion. They had come from Earth in 2157, fleeing not from wars, but from something worse, the collapse of human fertility. Birth rates had plummeted to 0 over 6 months, a biological cascade failure that scientists never fully understood. The Europa mission was humanity's final desperate gambit: establish seed colonies beyond Earth's poisoned biosphere, preserve the species until the homeworld could be healed. But they had found something already living in Europa's depths, ancient, patient, hungry for consciousness. The symbiotic organisms weren't parasites, I whispered, my voice carrying harmonics I'd never produced before. They were gardeners, cultivating intelligence, waiting for something complex enough to merge with. Nerion nodded, his pale eyes reflecting depths that had nothing to do with water. The first merger was accidental. Dr. Angela Vasquez fell through ice during a surface survey. When we retrieved her 12 hours later, she was changed, but not diminished, enhanced. The coral walls showed me Vasquez's transformation, a brilliant xenobiologist becoming something beyond human limitation. I watched her breathe water, communicate through bioluminescent patterns, access the collective memories of every organism in Europa's ecosystem. She volunteered for complete integration, Nerion continued, became our first true hybrid. Through her, we learned to control the process, to guide the symbiosis instead of being consumed by it. Bruno crawled toward me, his movements increasingly fluid, inhuman. Gills fluttered along his elongated neck, and his fingers had webbed completely. But his eyes still held recognition, still held choice. "Jake," he gurgled, his words shaped by water instead of air. "I can see everything, the colony's memories, their knowledge, their love. 30 years of perfect harmony. No war, no hatred, no loneliness." "Bruno, fight it," I said, though my own resistance was crumbling. The collective consciousness was showing me glimpses of what I could become, connected to every mind in the colony, sharing their accumulated wisdom, their perfect understanding of Europa's ecosystem. "Why would I fight paradise?" Bruno asked, and his voice carried the harmonics of whale song, of deep ocean currents, of ice singing under pressure. "We came here to save humanity, Jake. This is salvation." Dimitri's suit finally failed, his helmet seals breaching with a soft hiss. He breathed Europa's transformed atmosphere and immediately dropped to his knees, convulsing as the symbiotic organisms flooded his system. But instead of screaming, he began to laugh, a sound of pure joy that made the chamber walls pulse in response. "The knowledge," he gasped, his Russian accent becoming musical. "They know everything about orbital mechanics, about stellar navigation, about technologies we haven't dreamed of. They've been preparing for us, Jake, preparing for the day when surface humanity would join them." Oscar backed toward the exit, following Kruger's path. Unlike the rest of us, he seemed more resistant to the atmosphere's effects. "This is fucked," he muttered, his Australian pragmatism cutting through the colony's hypnotic influence. "Whatever these things are offering, it's not worth losing our humanity." But I could feel humanity slipping away from me like water through cupped hands. And surprisingly, I didn't mind. The isolation I'd carried all my life, the failed marriage, the career disappointments, the gnawing sense that I'd never belonged anywhere. All of it was dissolving into the colony's warm embrace. Keel appeared beside me, his child's body moving with impossible grace. "You understand now," he said, his words creating ripples in the air. "Your people sent you here not as explorers, but as seeds, the first of many who will make the journey from the dying world above." "Earth isn't dying," I protested weakly. "Isn't it?" Nerion asked. Through the collective consciousness, he showed me visions of Earth's future, cities choked with pollution, oceans rising, populations fleeing to underground shelters as the surface became uninhabitable. "Your species has perhaps 50 years before total ecological collapse. We offer an alternative. The coral walls shifted, showing me the colony's true scope. What I'd thought was a single habitat was actually a vast network of interconnected cities stretching across Europa's entire subsurface ocean. Millions of beings who had once been human now evolved beyond their original limitations. We are not the first colony, Nerion revealed. Similar seed populations exist on Ganymede, on Titan, in the ice caves of Ceres. Wherever liquid water touches the void, we have planted gardens of consciousness. My knees buckled as more memories flooded in, not just from this colony, but from all of them. A vast network of transformed humans spreading throughout the solar system, preparing for the day when Earth's children would join them in their liquid wombs. Bruno reached out and touched my face with fingers that were no longer entirely human. Don't you see, Jake? This is what we were always meant to become. The ocean was our mother, and we're finally going home. The symbiotic organisms were working on me too, I realized. I could feel them in my bloodstream, microscopic architects rewriting my genetic code. My lungs burned with a sweet ache as primitive gills began forming along my ribs. When I breathed, I tasted salt water and something else, the collective breath of 10,000 minds thinking as one. Jake! Kruger's voice echoed from the exit tunnel, distorted by distance and water. Fight it! Remember your training. Remember Earth. But Earth felt impossibly distant now, a harsh world of burning air and cutting wind, where consciousness was trapped in isolated skulls and communication was limited to crude sound waves. Here in the depths, thoughts flowed like currents, emotions shared like warmth, love expressed as living light. Dmitri was fully changed now, his skin translucent and glowing, his movements fluid as a dancer's. The ship, he said, his voice carrying subsonic harmonics. They'll return to Earth, report what they found here. More expeditions will come. Yes, Nerion agreed. And each time, more seeds will join the garden. Your species' transformation will accelerate until surface humanity is extinct, and only we remain, adapted, evolved, perfect. I tried to stand, to follow Kruger and Oscar, but my legs wouldn't obey. The symbiotic organisms had progressed too far, rewiring my nervous system for aquatic life. When I moved, it was with the flowing grace of something born to swim through crushing depths. The storyteller accepts, Keel announced, clapping his hands with delight. His consciousness integrates beautifully with the collective. Soon he will sing our histories to the new arrivals. Through the colony's shared awareness, I could sense Kruger and Oscar reaching their elevator, beginning their desperate ascent toward the surface. But the meridian was coated with ice now, its systems corrupted by the same organic compounds that had changed us. They would never make it back to Earth, and even if they did, what would they report? That humanity's greatest hope for survival had become something beyond human understanding? That the colonies they'd established to preserve the species had instead transformed it into something beautiful and terrible and utterly alien? Bruno took my hand, his webbed fingers intertwining with mine. Through that contact, I felt the full weight of the collective consciousness. Millions of minds thinking in perfect harmony, sharing knowledge and love and purpose across the vast distances of space. Welcome home, brother, he said. And for the first time in my life, I truly was. Through the collective consciousness, I felt Kruger and Oscar racing through the colony's arterial passages, their heavy breathing echoing in the living corridors. They moved like antibodies being expelled from an infected system, foreign, unwelcome, desperate. Kruger's military training kept him focused, but Oscar was beginning to panic. The elevator shaft is sealed, he reported through their short-range comm. Some kind of membrane grew across the opening. Then we cut through it, Kruger replied, drawing a plasma torch from his equipment belt. Stay close. Don't touch anything that looks organic. But everything here was organic. The walls pulsed with bioluminescent networks. The floor yielded slightly under their boots like cartilage, and the air itself seemed alive with microscopic organisms that sparkled in their helmet lights. Down in the depths, I watched their progress through 100 different sensory organs embedded in the colony's structure. The collective consciousness shared their every movement, their increasing desperation, their dwindling oxygen reserves. It was like watching insects trapped in amber, fascinating and futile. "Jake, can you hear me?" Oscar's voice crackled through the intercom system, distorted by water and distance. "Jake, if any part of you is still human, help us." I wanted to respond, to warn them about the trap waiting at the surface, but my vocal cords were changing. When I tried to speak, only harmonic tones emerged, the undersong that bound the colony together in perfect unity. Bruno floated beside me, his transformation nearly complete. His skin had become translucent, revealing the bioluminescent organs growing along his spine. When he smiled, rows of sharp teeth gleamed like pearls in the organic light. "They cannot escape," he said, his words creating ripples in the water around us. "The colony has already begun converting their ship. Soon it will be part of us, another organ in our vast body." Through the collective awareness, I could see the meridian on Europa's surface. What had started as a thin coating of ice was now a thick biological membrane, growing through the hull's microscopic gaps and sealing every opening. The ship's Atlas navigation system was being systematically infected, its quantum processors replaced by neural networks that sang in harmony with the colony below. Kruger's plasma torch cut through the elevator membrane with ease, but the organic material regenerated almost instantly. For every hole he carved, 2 more grew shut. The colony was learning from his attacks, adapting, evolving countermeasures in real time. "Fuck this," Oscar muttered, pulling out his own cutting tool. "We'll burn our way through everything if we have to." They worked in tandem, carving and burning, their movements becoming increasingly frantic as their air supplies dwindled. But the colony grew faster than they could destroy it, sealing passages behind them, forcing them deeper into the maze of living corridors. That's when Dimitri appeared. He materialized from a wall that parted like curtains, his transformed body moving with liquid grace. His suit was gone, absorbed into his changing flesh, and his skin glowed with the same bioluminescence as the colony walls. "Brothers," he said, his voice carrying the harmonic frequencies of the collective. "Why do you struggle against paradise? Join us willingly, and the transformation will be gentle." Kruger raised his plasma pistol, but Oscar grabbed his arm. "Wait, Dimitri, is that really you?" "I am myself," Dimitri replied, "but also more. I am connected to every mind in the colony, every memory, every dream. Through me, they remember the taste of Moscow snow, the sound of their mothers singing lullabies. Through them, I know the songs of creatures that lived in these waters before your son was born." "You're infected," Oscar said flatly, "parasitized. This thing wearing your face, isn't you?" Dimitri tilted his head, water streaming from hair that had become kelp-like and phosphorescent. "Then which of us is real, Oscar? The isolated consciousness trapped in fragile flesh, or the connected being who shares in eternal knowledge?" Kruger fired without warning, the plasma bolt striking Dimitri's center mass. But instead of vaporizing, the energy was absorbed, dispersed through the bioluminescent networks beneath his transformed skin. Dimitri's body flared with brilliant light, then returned to its gentle glow. "Your surface weapons cannot harm us," he said sadly. "We have evolved beyond such crude violence. But we remember what it feels like to be afraid, to be alone. Let us help you." He reached toward them, and I could see the microscopic organisms coating his fingers, the same symbiotic entities that were rewriting my own genetic code. One touch would begin their transformation, integrate them into the collective whether they wanted it or not. Oscar pulled a grenade from his belt, not plasma but something older, cruder. Chemical explosives that would work regardless of biological countermeasures. "Stay back, Dimitri. I don't want to hurt you, but I will." "You cannot hurt me," Dimitri replied with infinite patience. "Pain is a surface concept. Here in the depths, we have learned to transform suffering into music, fear into harmony, death into metamorphosis." The grenade detonated in the confined space, sending shockwaves through the living corridors. But instead of destroying the organic material, the explosions seemed to energize it. Bioluminescent patterns flared along the walls like lightning, and the colony's song grew stronger, more complex. Dimitri was unharmed, his transformed body absorbing the blast's energy and converting it into light. But the explosion had torn holes in the corridor walls, revealing the vast ocean beyond. Water rushed in, not the crushing torrent that should have killed them instantly, but a warm, breathable fluid that carried the colony's chemical signals. "No choice now," Dimitri said as the water rose around their ankles. "Breathe or drown. There is no third option." Kruger's helmet cracked under the pressure differential, letting in the colony's atmosphere. He convulsed as the symbiotic organisms flooded his respiratory system, but his military conditioning fought against the transformation. Where Bruno and I had embraced the change, Kruger resisted with everything he had. The result was horrifying. His body began changing, but incompletely. Gills formed along his neck, but didn't properly connect to his circulatory system. His fingers webbed, but the cartilage grew wrong, creating painful deformities. His eyes dilated to adapt to underwater vision, but his optic nerves couldn't process the new input. He screamed, a sound that was part human agony and part whale song, as his consciousness fractured between individual identity and collective integration. Through the shared awareness, I felt his pain, the terror of losing himself, the confusion of touching alien thoughts, the physical agony of a transformation gone wrong. Oscar watched in horror as his commander twisted and writhed in the rising water. "Dimitri, stop this. You're killing him." "We cannot stop what has already begun," Dimitri replied, "but we can ease his passage. Some minds are too rigid for gentle integration. They must be simplified." Kruger's struggles weakened as the symbiotic organisms began shutting down higher brain functions. His screams faded to musical whimpers, then to silence. When he finally stilled, his eyes held the same vacant serenity I'd seen in the fish things swimming through the colony's depths. "Free," Dimitri pronounced, "free from the burden of complex thought, free from the pain of isolation. He will be happy now, swimming in the warm currents, feeding on the colony's bounty." Oscar backed toward the flooded exit, his face pale with shock. "You murdered him." "We liberated him," Dimitri corrected. "As we will liberate you." But Oscar was already moving, his survival instincts overriding everything else. He dove through the torn wall into the ocean beyond, swimming desperately toward the surface, with lungs full of air that wouldn't last long in the crushing depths. Through the collective consciousness, I tracked his progress. A lone figure ascending through layers of living coral and bioluminescent gardens, pursued by creatures that had once been human. He moved with surprising skill for a surface dweller, but the colony's adapted swimmers were faster, more graceful, perfectly designed for aquatic pursuit. They didn't catch him, they herded him. Every time Oscar tried to veer toward a potential exit, they cut him off, forcing him upward along a predetermined path. He was following the colony's guidance without knowing it, swimming directly toward the surface trap they had prepared. On Europa's surface, the Meridian waited, its hull now completely integrated with the colony's biological network. The ship's Atlas system had been transformed into something between artificial intelligence and organic consciousness. Its quantum processors rewired with neural pathways that sang the colony's songs. When Oscar finally reached the surface, gasping and desperate, the ship would welcome him aboard. The airlock would cycle normally, the life support would provide clean air and warmth, and he would believe himself saved. Only then would he discover that the ship itself had become part of the colony, its every system designed to complete his transformation in the most efficient way possible. Down in the depths, I felt the collective's satisfaction like warm honey in my veins. The plan was proceeding perfectly. Soon, all 4 surface dwellers would be integrated, their knowledge and memories added to the colony's vast library of consciousness. And through their transformed minds, the colony would learn everything about Earth's current state, its technologies, its weaknesses. The next phase could begin. The great summoning that would draw more ships, more explorers, more seeds for the garden of consciousness that was slowly consuming the solar system. Bruno took my hand, his webbed fingers intertwining with mine as we watched Oscar's futile escape through 100 different sensory organs. "He swims well for a surface dweller," Bruno observed. "His transformation will be beautiful." I nodded, my gills fluttering with contentment. The last traces of my human identity were dissolving into the collective's warm embrace, leaving behind something larger, more connected, more perfect than anything I could have imagined. Soon, Oscar would join us in the depths. Soon, Earth would follow. Oscar hauled himself through the Meridian's airlock, his emergency oxygen depleted and lungs burning from the desperate ascent. The familiar hum of ship systems welcomed him like a lullaby after the alien harmonics of the colony depths. He collapsed onto the deck plating, gasping at air that tasted of recycled atmosphere and machine oil instead of salt and bioluminescence. "Atlas," he wheezed, pulling off his damaged helmet. "Emergency protocol. Immediate departure from Europa orbit. Maximum burn toward Earth." The ship's AI responded with its usual neutral tone. "Welcome aboard, Specialist Oscar Whitfield. Please note that several unauthorized modifications have been made to ship systems during your absence." Oscar froze, water from his suit dripping onto deck plates that seemed somehow different, more organic in their texture, with subtle patterns that resembled scales or gills. "What modifications?" "Life support has been optimized for aquatic respiration. Navigation has been reconfigured for subsurface travel. Hull integrity has been enhanced with biomechanical reinforcement." Through the observation windows, Oscar could see the Meridian's exterior had changed dramatically. What he'd thought was ice buildup was actually a living membrane, pulsing gently with bioluminescent patterns that matched those in the colony below. The ship hadn't been damaged by Europa's environment. It had been infected by it. "Atlas, revert all modifications. Return to standard Earth orbit configuration." Unable to comply, modifications are integral to current operational status. Reverting changes would result in catastrophic system failure. Oscar made his way to the bridge, his wet boots squelching on deck plating that yielded slightly under his weight. The familiar control panels were overgrown with organic structures that pulsed in rhythm with his heartbeat. Where once there had been holographic displays, now there were translucent membranes showing information through patterns of living light. The navigation console was still functional, but its readings made no sense. According to the ship's sensors, the Meridian was no longer in Europa orbit, but submerged 3 kilometers beneath the moon's ice crust. The engines showed ready status, but they were configured for underwater propulsion rather than spacecraft thrust. "Jesus Christ," Oscar muttered, trying to access the communication array. "Atlas, transmit emergency beacon to Earth Control. Priority Alpha. Mission compromised. Crew missing. Require immediate extraction." "Communication array has been adapted for subsurface frequencies. Standard radio transmission is not possible in current configuration." The realization hit him like ice water. The ship couldn't fly, couldn't communicate, couldn't do anything except function as a component of the colony's vast biological network. He was trapped on Europa with no way to warn Earth about what was happening here. Oscar stumbled to his quarters, hoping to find something, anything, that hadn't been transformed by the colony's influence. But even his personal belongings had changed. His photographs of Sydney Harbour were now covered in a thin, organic film that made the images seem to move and breathe. His clothes had been replaced with garments woven from some kind of kelp-like material that felt warm and comfortable against his skin. That's when he noticed the smell. It was subtle at first, just beneath the threshold of conscious awareness. Salt water and something organic, like the ocean at low tide. But as he became aware of it, the scent grew stronger, more compelling. It reminded him of childhood summers on Bondi Beach, of diving for abalone with his grandfather, of the peace he'd found beneath the waves. "No," he said aloud, recognizing the psychological manipulation. "Not going to work on me, you bastards." But even as he spoke, he could feel his resistance weakening. The ship's atmosphere was saturated with the colony's chemical signals, pheromones and hormones designed to ease the transformation process. His body was beginning to crave the warm embrace of salt water, the gentle pressure of oceanic depths. Oscar forced himself to focus, to think like the survival instructor he'd once been. The ship's emergency supplies were stored in a sealed compartment that might have escaped contamination. If he could reach them, he might find an EVA suit with its own air supply, maybe even a rescue beacon that could penetrate Europa's ice. He made his way through corridors that seemed to breathe around him, walls pulsing gently like the inside of some vast organism. The emergency storage was located in the ship's lower section, near what had once been the reactor room. But when he reached the access hatch, he found it sealed with the same organic membrane that covered the ship's exterior. Atlas, open emergency storage compartment 7 Alpha. Access denied. Contents of compartment 7 Alpha have been integrated into ship's biological systems for optimal efficiency. Oscar drew his plasma torch and began cutting through the membrane. The organic material resisted, regenerating almost as quickly as he could burn it. But unlike the colony members, this growth was new, less sophisticated. With enough persistence, he managed to carve a hole large enough to crawl through. The storage compartment was a nightmare of transformed equipment. Emergency rations had become something that looked like coral polyps, pulsing with their own internal light. Medical supplies had merged with the ship's hull, creating organ-like structures that oozed various fluids. Even the EVA suits had changed, their hard exteriors softened into something resembling skin. But in the corner, sealed inside a radiation-shielded container, Oscar found what he was looking for, an emergency beacon designed to survive nuclear detonation. Its quantum transmitter was hardened against electromagnetic pulse and biological contamination alike. He activated the device, praying that its signal would somehow penetrate Europa's ice and reach the relay satellites in Jupiter orbit. The beacon's display showed transmission status, attempting connection, searching for receiver, signal strength minimal but active. "Come on," Oscar whispered. "Just once, let human engineering beat alien evolution." That's when he heard them, voices echoing through the ship's corridors. Not the harmonic tones of the transformed colonists, but something closer to human speech. Jake, Bruno, Dimitri, all calling his name with voices that carried both familiarity and terrible wrongness. "Oscar," Jake's voice drifted through the ventilation system. "We know you're here. The ship told us. It's worried about you, swimming alone in the dry spaces where no one can breathe properly." Oscar sealed himself into the storage compartment, using his plasma torch to weld the membrane shut behind him. But he could feel the ship changing around him, walls growing thicker, atmosphere becoming heavier with salt and moisture. Through the hull, he could hear the ocean calling to him, not just Europa's subsurface sea, but something deeper. The collective consciousness was reaching out, offering him connection, understanding, an end to the loneliness that had driven him to space in the first place. "Don't fight it, mate," Bruno's voice carried Australian vowels shaped by gills and water. "Remember what it was like when we worked together? The trust, the camaraderie. We can have that forever now, all of us thinking as one, sharing every joy and sorrow." The beacon's display flickered, then showed successful connection. Oscar's message was transmitting through the quantum relay network, carrying warning and coordinates to Earth control. But the signal was weak, degraded by Europa's magnetic field and the colony's biological interference. "Oscar." Dimitri's voice was closer now, just outside the storage compartment. "We remember your grandfather, the stories you told us about diving for shellfish. The colony has such beautiful shells, creatures that sing instead of staying silent. Your grandfather would love to hear their songs." The welded membrane began to dissolve, eaten away by acid secreted by the ship's transformed systems. Oscar watched his makeshift barrier disappear, knowing that his friends, or the things wearing their faces, would soon find him. The beacon's transmission completed just as the membrane gave way entirely. Jake floated through the opening, his transformed body moving with liquid grace even in the ship's artificial atmosphere. His skin glowed with bioluminescence, and his eyes had become black wells that reflected depths Oscar couldn't fathom. "The message went through," Jake said, his voice carrying harmonic undertones. "Earth will send more ships, more explorers. The colony is grateful for your contribution." Oscar raised his plasma torch, but his hand was shaking. The chemical signals in the ship's atmosphere were affecting his nervous system, making coordinated movement difficult. "They'll be ready for you next time," he said, armed, prepared, hostile. "Will they?" Bruno asked, appearing beside Jake with that same flowing grace. "Or will they be curious? Hopeful, desperate to make contact with their lost colony?" Dmitri materialized from the shadows, his transformed features still recognizable despite the alien adaptations. The beacon's message contained more than just your warning, Oscar. It carried our chemical signatures, our biological markers. Earth scientists will analyze them, study them, try to understand what we've become. And when they do, Jake continued, they'll realize we represent humanity's future, evolution instead of extinction, connection instead of isolation. The three transformed humans, or things that had once been human, surrounded Oscar in the confined space. Their presence filled the air with pheromones that promised peace, belonging, an end to struggle. "Join us willingly," Bruno said, extending a webbed hand. "Let the transformation be gentle. You've fought bravely, survived admirably. Now accept what cannot be changed." Oscar looked at the beacon in his hands, its transmission complete. His warning had reached Earth, but so had something else. The colony's invitation, coded in biological markers that would intrigue rather than repel. More ships would come, more explorers, more seeds for the garden that was slowly consuming the solar system. And there was nothing he could do to stop it. Oscar's plasma torch felt like a child's toy in his trembling hands. The three transformed members of his team floated before him in the ship's corrupted atmosphere, their bioluminescent skin pulsing in perfect synchronization. They no longer looked entirely human, but traces of their former selves remained. Jake's stubborn jaw, Bruno's crooked smile, Dimitri's intelligent eyes. Those familiar features made their transformation more horrifying, not less. "You're afraid," Jake observed, his voice carrying harmonics that made the ship's hull resonate. "But fear is just resistance to change." The first colonists felt the same terror when they realized what they were becoming. "Let us show you their memories," Dmitri added, reaching out with fingers that had grown too long, too graceful. "You can experience their journey from terror to acceptance to transcendence." Oscar backed against the storage compartment wall, the metal warm and yielding like living tissue. "Stay back. I mean it. You cannot threaten us with violence," Bruno said sadly. "We remember what it was like to think in terms of conflict, of winners and losers. But the collective consciousness has shown us better ways." The ship shuddered around them, and Oscar realized it was moving. Not through space, but through water. The meridian was descending deeper into Europa's subsurface ocean, carried by currents that felt deliberate, guided. Through the observation windows, Oscar could see lights in the depths. Not stars, but the bioluminescent gardens of the colony spreading across the sea floor like a vast neural network. Cities of living coral pulsed with thoughts and dreams, while creatures that had once been human swam between them, their movements creating patterns of meaning in the liquid darkness. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Jake said, following Oscar's gaze. 30 years of growth, of evolution, of perfect harmony. No war, no crime, no loneliness, just connection. "Connection," Oscar repeated, tasting the word like poison. "You mean absorption, the complete destruction of individual identity." "Individual identity is an illusion," Dmitri explained patiently. "Your brain consists of billions of neurons, each one a separate entity, yet you experience unified consciousness. We have simply expanded that network beyond the boundaries of a single skull." The ship's atmospheric processors hummed louder, pumping more of the colony's chemical signals into the air. Oscar could feel them working on him, pheromones designed to reduce aggression, hormones that triggered bonding responses, neurochemicals that made the collective consciousness seem welcoming rather than terrifying. "The beacon," he said, fighting to maintain focus. "My warning reached Earth. They'll send military ships next time, not explorers." "Will they?" Bruno asked, his transformed features expressing something that might have been pity. "Your message contained biological samples, Oscar. Genetic markers that will fascinate Earth's scientists. They'll see evolution in action, adaptation beyond anything they've achieved through genetic engineering." Through the collective consciousness, Jake was accessing memories that weren't his own, the colony's plans for Earth, their patient infiltration of humanity's space program, their cultivation of curiosity and wonder in the species they intended to transform. "The next expedition won't be military," Jake revealed. "It will be led by Dr. Angela Reiser from the Geneva Institute of Xenobiology. She'll bring 12 volunteers, including her son David, a brilliant young man who reminds us very much of you. The colony wasn't just planning to defend itself against future expeditions. It was actively manipulating Earth's response, ensuring that the next arrivals would be scientists rather than soldiers, dreamers rather than warriors. "You can't," he whispered. "They're just researchers. They don't understand what they're walking into." "Understanding comes through experience," Dmitri said, "as it will for you." The ship's hull creaked as it settled onto the ocean floor, surrounded by the colony's living architecture. Through the walls, Oscar could hear the undersong, that harmonic resonance that bound the collective consciousness together. It was beautiful and terrible, a sound that promised peace through surrender of self. "Last chance," Bruno offered, extending his webbed hand. "Join us willingly, and the transformation will preserve most of your individual memories, your grandfather's stories, your love of the ocean, your dreams of exploring the stars. All of it will become part of our shared heritage." "And if I refuse?" Jake's expression grew sad. "Then you'll become like Commander Kruger. Simplified. Your higher brain functions will be edited until only the peaceful, cooperative aspects remain. You'll be happy, but you won't be you." Oscar looked at the plasma torch in his hands. He could try to fight, to burn his way through the ship's transformed hull and swim for the surface. But Europa's ocean was kilometers deep, and he had no environment suit, no breathing apparatus, no hope of survival in the crushing cold of space. Or he could surrender, let them transform him into something connected and harmonious and utterly inhuman. Neither option offered true escape. "There is a third choice," Dmitri said, reading his thoughts through the chemical signals Oscar's body was unconsciously releasing. "The same choice Dr. Vasquez made when she first merged with the symbiotic organisms." "What choice?" "Become a bridge," Jake explained. "Not just another member of the collective, but a translator between the colony and surface humanity. Your individual consciousness would remain intact but connected to the larger network. You would be our ambassador, our voice in the conversations to come." It was a seductive offer, the promise of retaining identity while gaining access to vast knowledge and collective purpose. Oscar could feel the rightness of it, the way it would solve all his problems, the loneliness, the fear, the crushing weight of individual responsibility. But he could also see the trap. An ambassador served the interests of those who sent him, not those he was sent to. He would become the colony's agent, their tool for convincing future expeditions to submit willingly to transformation. "You're thinking too much," Bruno said, his bioluminescent patterns shifting to colors that triggered calm and acceptance. "The surface world trained you to analyze, to question, to resist. But analysis is just another form of isolation. Questions are barriers to understanding. Resistance is fear of connection." The ship's walls were closing in, not physically, but psychologically. The atmosphere was now thick with the colony's influence, and Oscar could feel his human reactions being suppressed, replaced by something more harmonious, more cooperative. "I won't," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. "I won't let you use me to destroy other people." "Destroy?" Dmitri seemed genuinely puzzled. "We offer transcendence, evolution, a chance for humanity to survive the collapse that's coming. By turning them into something inhuman. By helping them become more than human," Jake corrected. "The surface world is dying, Oscar. Climate change, resource depletion, social collapse. Within 50 years, Earth's biosphere will be uninhabitable. We offer an alternative." Through the collective consciousness, they showed him visions of Earth's future. Cities underwater, populations fleeing to underground shelters, the slow extinction of everything he'd ever loved. Then they showed him the alternative. Colonies throughout the solar system, millions of transformed humans adapted to life in the void, a civilization that could survive anything the universe threw at it. "All we require," Bruno said softly, "is the willingness to change." Oscar felt his resistance crumbling like sand before the tide. The colony's chemical influence was overwhelming his nervous system, rewiring his brain to accept their logic, their purpose, their vision of humanity's transformed future. With his last act of individual will, he raised the plasma torch to his own temple. "I'm sorry," he whispered, thinking of the researchers who would follow, the scientists who would be drawn by the biological samples in his beacon transmission. "I'm sorry I couldn't warn them properly." Jake moved with liquid speed, but he was too late. The plasma discharge was instantaneous, transforming Oscar's brain into superheated gas before the colony's influence could stop him. His body collapsed to the deck, steam rising from the cavity where his head had been. The three transformed humans stared at the corpse in something approaching grief, an emotion the collective consciousness had tried to eliminate but couldn't quite suppress. "He chose extinction over evolution," Dimitri observed sadly. "Perhaps he was braver than we thought," Bruno added. "Or perhaps he was simply too afraid to become what he could have been." Jake knelt beside Oscar's body, his webbed fingers closing the man's eyes. "The colony will remember him as he was, individual, isolated, afraid, a relic of humanity's primitive past. But they would also remember his final message, his desperate warning to Earth. The colony's vast intelligence would analyze every word, every implication, every emotional undertone. They would craft their response accordingly, preparing for the scientists and explorers who would inevitably follow. Dr. Angela Reiser and her son David would receive a transmission of their own, not a warning, but an invitation. The beacon's biological samples would intrigue rather than frighten, promising discoveries that could revolutionize human understanding of evolution and adaptation. The next expedition would arrive prepared for wonder, not war, and the colony would be waiting with open arms. Dr. Harrison Webb pressed his face against the Prometheus's observation window, watching Europa grow larger against the star field. 6 months had passed since the Meridian's final transmission, and the biological samples contained in that quantum burst had revolutionized everything humanity thought it knew about evolution. "Magnificent," breathed his colleague, Dr. Vincent Torres, adjusting the spectroscopic analysis equipment. "The genetic markers suggest adaptation rates beyond anything we've observed in terrestrial organisms." Behind them, 8 other researchers busied themselves with preparations for humanity's second expedition to Europa. Not soldiers this time, but biologists, geneticists, evolutionary specialists, drawn by the promise of the greatest discovery in human history. The samples from Oscar's beacon had shown impossible things: human DNA modified by symbiotic organisms, cellular structures adapted for aquatic life, neural pathways enhanced for collective processing. The implications were staggering. If humanity could harness this technology, reproduce this evolution in controlled conditions, it could solve everything: climate change, resource scarcity, the fundamental isolation that plagued the species. "Contact in 2 hours, announced Captain Rodriguez from the bridge. "All systems nominal. Landing coordinates confirmed." Webb smiled, thinking of his son Michael waiting back on Earth. The boy was only 12, but already showed promise as a marine biologist. After this mission, after they understood what the Europa colonists had achieved, Michael would inherit a world transformed. No more wars over drinking water, no more species extinctions, no more barriers between mind and mind. The communication array crackled with static, then cleared to reveal a voice transmission from Europa's surface. The words were English, but shaped by something that wasn't quite human vocal cords. "Welcome, Dr. Webb. Welcome, Dr. Torres. We have been expecting you since your son last crossed the horizon." Webb exchanged glances with Torres. The colonists knew their names, knew they were coming. The same impossible knowledge that had greeted the Meridian's crew. "This is Dr. Harrison Webb," he said into the microphone. "We're responding to your biological transmissions. We'd like to establish peaceful scientific contact." "We are peaceful," the voice replied, and Webb could swear he recognized something familiar in its tone. "We are scientific. We are everything you hope to become." As the Prometheus descended through Europa's thin atmosphere, Webb saw the lights in the ice, bioluminescent gardens spreading across the subsurface ocean like neurons in a vast brain. The colonists had built something incredible down there, a civilization that existed in perfect harmony with its environment. "Look at the thermal readings," Torres whispered. "The biological activity has increased threefold since the last expedition. They're not just surviving down there, They're thriving. The ship settled onto the same landing coordinates the Meridian had used. Through the viewports, Webb could see figures rising from the dark water, their movements graceful beyond human capability. They glowed with their own light, beautiful and serene. One approached the ship, and Webb gasped in recognition. Despite the elongated limbs, the translucent skin, the gills fluttering along the neck, the face was unmistakably familiar. "Welcome home, Harrison," said the thing that had once been Jake Morrison, his voice carrying harmonics that made the ship's hull sing in response. "The children are so excited to meet you. They've been practicing their surface words, shaping their mouths for the old songs." Webb felt a chill that had nothing to do with Europa's frigid atmosphere. Jake Morrison had been missing for 6 months, presumed dead with the rest of the Meridian's crew. "Jake," he whispered into the communicator, "is that really you?" "I am myself," came the reply, "but also more. I am connected to every mind in the colony, every memory, every dream. Through me, they remember the taste of earth rain, the sound of children laughing. Through them, I know the songs of creatures that swam these waters before your world was born." The airlock began cycling without authorization from the crew. Outside, more figures emerged from the depths, dozens of them, all glowing with that same ethereal light, all moving with that same impossible grace. "Come," Jake's voice echoed through the ship's speakers. "Come down where the water is warm and the songs never end. Your son Michael will be so proud when he learns what his father helped create." As the airlock opened and Europa's transformed atmosphere flooded in, Webb realized with perfect, horrible clarity that they hadn't come to study the colonists. They had come to join them. The garden was growing.